Okay, hi everyone. I am Alistair Lewis and I founded Automated Data-Driven Design. We're doing a live webinar today and I'm delighted that we've got three special guests on today to talk about the report into generative design that I've spent the last 3 months or so putting together. It's quite a mammoth exercise looking at around 30 different generative design and early stage design tools. It's over 400 pages. And the three people here have unfortunately had to look through the majority of that. So I thank them very much for it. I'd love to do quick introductions for everyone. So I'll start with you, Arvind, if that's okay.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Arvinder Singh. I'm an architectural designer. I have about 5 years of experience in the industry. I'm currently working as a designer at Walker Consultants in Chicago. Outside of my day job, I'm building my own architectural automation tools. And one of them is a system that tries to automate architectural drafting. So happy to be here.
Thanks. James, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Alistair. I'm James. I am an architect by trade. Got dragged into the world of BIM and digital design probably too long ago to remember, but I've had the pleasure of working for some amazing architectural practices. However, I'm currently technical director at a scan to BIM consultancy based in the Midlands in the UK.
Amazing, lovely, great. And John.
Hi everyone, John Arnott here. So I trained as an architect many years ago, probably 20 years ago almost. So it's I've been in the industry quite a while. But basically my over the years, essentially my role in my kind of career, essentially I've evolved into that digital space. So how technology obviously can completely change the way we build, design and operate the built environment is really what kind of drives me these days. And back in the early days, I implemented one of the first ever implementations of Revit outside of London, which was quite exciting. So that was absolutely a baptism of fire. And my career kind of went from there really, working at places like Scott Brownrigg, Broadway Malyon, excuse me, and then more recently with MatterLab and Cope, and then in the last 5 months since October, I've now started my own consultancy where I help essentially architectural, engineering, construction, etc. businesses integrate things like computation, generative design, AI, and all that good stuff that goes around that. So my late nights at the moment are just kind of dreaming up new ways and fun ways of how I can help those businesses essentially, so that we can all basically stop pulling our hair out and stop the late evenings that we all experience. That's kind of my role.
Excellent. Yeah, and that's a really good place to start with this, because so to give context to those who may be watching, so I've put together this report into generative design. I will share that with everyone so you can see it here. So last year I did a post on generative design on LinkedIn, and it had a number of different options on it as a list essentially, and it got a lot of interest from people, so that made me think, okay, maybe we need to look into this a bit more. And there were a huge number of options and lots of architects asking which one's right for me, basically. So I took it upon myself to have a look into this in detail. The other thing that I did last year was to develop the future AEC software specification assessment. So I'm going to share this on the screen. So if you don't know of this at the moment, it's worth having a look at. So if it's the industry's way of saying we want to see better tools out there which meet our needs. Going back to Revit and what John's just said there, we know Revit has limitations and it hasn't progressed very much. And we did talk about that at the last session, if you want to watch that, the limits and problems with Revit. And this criteria is extremely helpful to say, actually, for software in construction, this is what the industry would like to see. So it's put together by a number of really amazing firms, including James, I think was one of the instrumental people on that as well. And yeah, you're welcome to speak more about it. But there's a number of sections to this, and I took it upon myself to create a assessment for that, basically. So for each of those criteria, you could have a section where you could score a software quantitatively to say, actually, you know, this is where we think it's good, this is where it could improve. And I've used that essentially in this report to quantitatively score 21 of the software that are in there, and also give a qualitative assessment of the software as well. So just so you can see, gives an overview of generative design. There's an overview of each of the different options in here as well. And then this is the section where I look into all the scoring of those software. So this is turned into, as I said, a mammoth task. It's 415 pages long, which is a bit long maybe, but it's 3 months worth of work, and I'd like it to be kind of considered as the sort of the comprehensive look at generative design for the industry. So with that, I am going to pass back to the others here just to provide me with, I suppose, their thoughts and their kind of comments based on what they found from the report, because I don't know what the feedback's going to be. So I don't know, James, as you're new today, and sorry, John, you are as well. But would you like to kind of kick off and kind of maybe give an overview of what you found and what you thought?
Sure. I mean, look, it's a fantastic piece of work. And I don't think anyone should underestimate the amount of effort that's gone into it. I suppose we're lucky and have a challenge that so many pieces of software have come to market. And I do mean that. I think it's a great time and it's a great space to see so many new products that are finding new ways of trying to solve challenges that designers have. And I think that's a really fortunate position to be in. However, when I put my design technology lead or IT lead, however people find themselves joining this hat on, you start to think to yourself, crikey, how are firms of different sizes going to navigate that landscape? And I think that's why having the report is so invaluable, because we're essentially trying to find ways to shortcut information, and I think it's really objective. So I think it's objective information about the tools that are available, and that's what I found great about it. I mean, it's a huge piece of work. There are a lot of tools on the market, and it reviews them all objectively. If you're in the position where you are fortunate enough to either work at a company that does some R&D, or perhaps you're someone who gets to lead on a bit of R&D, I think certainly the people on this call can sympathise that there just isn't enough hours in a day to look at as many tools as are currently on the market objectively, to know what to test or how to prioritise that. So I would see the report in very simple terms as a great means of fast tracking that. And perhaps if you wanted to do more targeted based research or pilots of certain products, this would be a great gateway to do that.
Amazing, thank you, I appreciate that. John, I'll pass over to you.
Well, I think James has obviously hit the nail on the head around kind of the obviously the objective element of it in terms of the review. It's like you said, there's no kind of one way or another in terms of being slanted right from a commercial perspective or any of that kind of stuff. It's just literally as it is, how the tools come out the box, what's good, what's not so good, which is obviously great from our point of view. If you run a practice, if you're in a BIM lead position or an IT director position or whatever, it's fantastic in that sense. I think just to echo James's point as well around we're lucky and challenged at the same time. I think the report highlights, and I think everything you're doing at ADD, Alistair, as well, also highlights, I think, the kind of the good and the bad of where we're at. Like, it's good that we've got a lot of stuff coming out, which is challenging some of those incumbents, which is great. But actually, I was reminded as I was reading the report, I think it's midway through, when you're just in the initial kind of layout of kind of here's the 30 or so options for early stage design, there's a lot of what seems like crossover until you start to delve into the actual features of functions. So again, I think that bit within the report is again useful, right? It just gives people a bit more understanding without having to let's just crack open 30 bits of software and hope for the best, and maybe only get to 10 of them because we've run out of time and we've got other things to worry about. So yeah, I think that's going to be really helpful, particularly towards the end when you're doing the pros, cons, and all the comparisons and things.
Yeah, Yeah, it's a big exercise. That's the main thing, isn't it? But yeah, like when you talk about being a short circuit, that makes a load of sense. Actually, the idea is to help people get to this conclusion faster. Arvinder, would you like to offer some thoughts?
Honestly, you guys covered it all. I mean, there's not much more to say than it's an excellent piece of work, and you have shown the current state of this industry, sub industry, and we really can see how much is happening right now, and it's a super fast moving environment. Having so many iterations of generative design software come up and evolving is challenging to even parse through. So you doing this excellent work has allowed us to at least get a screenshot of the moment and understand what's currently out there, so people starting out or established firms can actually start to evaluate what they need to include in their workflows going forward. It also shows that Autodesk might be getting challenged. There's definitely tools out there that are coming up that will soon start taking chunks away from what Autodesk is doing. So I think you can clearly see that with your in-depth assessment of some of them, where it clearly shows a huge value proposition of what you can achieve with early stage design and automation tools. So I think everyone should really look into it, and not just architects or urban planners or AEC firms, but software firms who are developing in this space as well, to try to completely understand the playing field and what they're playing against. So
yeah, and I think that's a great point, actually, Arvinder, right? What you picked up on there about the understanding the playing field, because as I mentioned, when you read the report of how many, Alice, do you know how many off the top of your head? It's over 30, I know that, but
it's about 30,
exactly.
32 different pieces of software in there, and I've reviewed about 21 of them.
Yeah, so but when you look through it, like I say, because there's those crossover elements, and there is some of the tools are doing similar things and so on. Yeah, I think it just hopefully opens the eyes, not just of the market in terms of the consumer, but of those building software, like what not to bother dealing with, because there's already a bunch of stuff that's clearly doing some good stuff or trying to do some good stuff, and I think it'll get better as it goes. And I think to that point, Alistair, there was one thing that when I was reading through the report that came to mind was Snapshot, right? Like when that first came out, I absolutely fell in love with it. To me, it was like potentially a Revit killer. And I know the guys have taken a pivot, and they've got some nice releases coming over the next few weeks and months. But I'm just excited to see where they've taken that, because it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But that point, why I've raised that is because I think that's what you'll see with some of these tools, where some of them will say, well, why would we keep developing these functions if somebody else has got it right? Let's just not bother with that and pivot out of that thing and go into something else and fill another use case or another problem case, essentially.
Yeah.
If I could add one more thing, Alistair, I think it would be for those who perhaps are interested in this field, but perhaps are not currently as in the swamp with it as maybe the rest of us are. There's always that fear of missing out, and when social media and marketing entities make a lot of noise about things, it's really hard to distinguish what is genuinely something that's viable and things that could actually help you, versus a lot of noise around these things. If I take my head back 15 years ago or so, when BIM and Revit were synonymous with each other, there was a lot of marketing noise, and it's done great things for the industry, but it didn't necessarily help certain different size firms know when to go, and I think that's really important. I think it's really easy for some of the big companies to say, we know where we are on that bell curve. This is where we want to be on the bell curve. Therefore, there are certain behaviours we have to adopt as a result of that. And other practices maybe don't have the luxury or can't afford the time to make that decision. Where do we want to be on the curve? And therefore, where is the right time for us? But how do we stay sort of up to date in a, I feel informed way, to know whether now or later might be the right time to jump. And again, the report would be really useful for that, just because of the amount of context and background that it provides around generative design and AI within AEC as a whole.
Absolutely. It's funny you've mentioned that, James, right? Honestly, I wrote this note when I was reading the report, which says obviously now there's a lot of options, right, which we didn't have necessarily before. And my note was basically that this might make it. You mentioned it yourself, right? People might not know where to start, and obviously the salesperson's job isn't necessarily to provide you with the perfect solution. They're just going to say, well, I see there's a problem and we can fill that gap, right? So I think that would be, just to echo your point, I think absolutely right. Like, people just make sure you read this report, I think, first, before really kind of getting, having phone calls or meetings or whoever with whatever provider and vendor, because I think you could quickly be taken down a rabbit hole that might not be the right one for you.
So
I'd
there's
like
two
to
things. Oh,
go
no,
for
go.
it, Alistair.
No. It's not about me. This is about you.
I mean, I really like that point, John. And then another point you had previously made was that there seems like a lot of overlap between the features that these tools might be offering, and yet there is a dissection of niche that they're all finding. I wanted to ask you guys, and even the audience members out there, and they can comment what they think the role of these software would be going forward, because are they going to start combining features or merging features together? Because right now there's a lot of dissection of workflow happening. I wonder if something like Revit, even though it is still very focused on creating documents and construction documents specifically, it can still do a lot more than that. Not everything great, but it can. Do you guys think that some of these software will start taking on those responsibilities as well?
Go on, John. Jump in.
John looked like he
Oh,
was more
sorry.
desperate
I
to
was
jump than
reading
I
that.
was.
I've been no, I was being polite. That's why I've got mute on so that I can't go. Yeah. I think I mentioned it earlier. Like, I use Snaptrade as an example, but I do think there's other solutions in that report that Alistair's put together that, in time, absolutely could take the mantle away from some of these incumbents that we're familiar with, whether you love them or hate them. They are there, and they are what they are. But the reason, look, let's be honest, right? Like, Revit is a piece of technology that was designed and built, 25 years ago? I don't know. I can't even remember the origins of that, but so we're miles on from where that started, right? And even if I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but here we are. But I remember being at a AU forum or something to that effect years ago, and I'm talking probably maybe 7-8 years ago, and it was inside one of the development discussions with the product leads, and they said at that time, like, look, we are struggling to develop this product where we want to take it because of the technology that we're building on. It's just so old, essentially. So it doesn't surprise me that there's new tool sets coming out with the new technologies in the back end that allows them to kind of potentially take over. And I'm hopeful that will happen, because I think if we kind of need it, let's be fair, right? Once you've got kind of decent competitors, then it kind of makes everybody else kind of shake the tree a little bit and make changes. So
now, I think you've also raised another good point there, which is every business is unique, and products have to try and serve a large variety of businesses, whether that's the large, well-established ones or the new ones that are up and coming. And we live in a world where everybody wants to customize things, whether that's the spaces you live in, the cars you drive, the clothes you wear. Like, there's a level of customization that we are so used to in our lives, and it's typically larger monolithic products lack that. There's an element of customization to them, but it's an element of customization within the greater framework of the software. Whereas when lots of different products come to market where there is some overlap and there is some difference, you potentially have the ability to choose a product which is slightly better suited to you, or may serve your needs better as a result of some of those differences. Yes, in some cases, as the report makes quite clear, there are maturity differences in those products. They're at different stages of their life cycle. But again, I think another good point, which you've made, Alistair, is if the report helps steer you towards a list that is trimmed down and you can do some testing with that list, you also then get the opportunity to partner with that company and actually spend some time to invest, to give them some real feedback, to say, of all the things I've looked at, this suits us better because of X and Y, and be really transparent with them. You know, people have long talked about people, process, technology cycle, whether it's a Venn diagram or something cyclical, and that literally requires people to share what they know, the challenges they have, and give the software vendors the opportunity to help them with that. It's not a case of shoehorning a product in because they need to make a sale. It's finding what's genuinely appropriate for you and the business and the design problem that you're trying to solve. And I think when you focus around problems and finding a way to massage your processes, you'll probably get more from it.
Yeah. There's two things you've touched on, which I think are quite interesting in discussion so far. So one is to do with who we think the main user of this software will be, because through the research I did, it is obvious that some of these tools are not meant for architects, and they're meant for developers and real estate clients and people who want to test out viability for a site, you know, in advance of doing what we'd call a feasibility. I think they're called capacity studies. Viability may be super early stage, so that someone is going, I want to buy a site and build houses or flats, whatever. What can I get on this site? So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that a little bit. And then also thinking about cost for workflows as well. And I'm just going to share my screen just very quickly, where we have got, you know, I've put together some diagrams which show how these workflows go together, and then possible costs for those, which is in is it this one? Yeah, here, to say actually if you introduce a generative design tool or an early stage design tool into your workflow, how does it then impact costs on a per user per month basis? So what I've done in the report is got these in here, but yeah, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on the potential users and thinking about also about, you know, how costs are impacted.
Okay, I'll go.
Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, so I think a couple of things. You know, just first on that last point before we move on, I do absolutely agree that this is the opportunity for the industry to work with some of these vendors to shape the products that they really want. I know that they're all going to be different to that. They're going to be kind of different in terms of their willingness to want to hear what you've got to say, but most of them, I think, from my experience, will be absolutely willing to hear feedback and input on how you want to take that forward. I know that from obviously our experience, Cope and Alison, when we were working at a previous company, we were very keen to kind of work with our clients and kind of revolve and develop the product around that. So that's the only thing I say there. But to answer your question then, so around kind of the new softwares and being a bit more specific around users, in a lot of ways I think that is a good thing, right? Like, and I think we probably need a bit more of that. I think, James, you mentioned earlier this idea that Revit is trying to be all things to all people at all times is insane, right? Like, you know, why not have a bit more specific tools? And I think the ones that come out a lot, and also I think you mentioned it there, the developer stuff, right? Like feasibility of sites, like is how much, you know, what's my ROI going to look like on that? And we know, again, we've developed tools in the past, but, you know, you're seeing some of the big guys coming out with decent ones now, where they're saying, well, actually, we could hand it off to the contractor and they can understand right away how quickly, you know, they're going to get the return or whatever, or how can they maximize that site or whatever. I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, the only thing I would say to that, and I think it was something else I wrote when I was reading through the report, which is that I think this comes back to this idea that we need to really understand, like, from an architectural perspective, obviously I appreciate engineers and contractors and the others might have a different view, but certainly from an architect's point of view, that traditionally would be in their workload, and it's how comfortable are we to to allow that to be offloaded somewhere else, either to the contractor developer or another specialist, as we keep seeing happening over the years. And I think my only point really is maybe using these tool sets to our advantage and essentially taking control and ownership before somebody else does. But that's just kind of my thoughts on that. I think, Alistair, you mentioned it in your report about Keir Regan Alexander's article around fees and value and stuff. So yeah, that's why I've kind of mentioned that now, because I was like, that's gone through my head, and when I was writing my notes, I was like, it's absolutely spot on, right? Like I absolutely think that there's nothing wrong with these things happening in different spaces within the construction industry, but it just raises, I think, a bigger question outside of software. That's all. That was all I was going to throw in there.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah. And yeah, what Keir talked about, I'll try and find a link to that actually to share. But looking at the value proposition of architects, what is that? And question. Let me find a link for that now, actually. Arvinder, do you want us to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to kind of, I guess, maybe point out my concern starting out as a younger architect. I guess I'm still not licensed yet, and if I want to start my own firm, I'm just thinking what my costs would be in the future with the proliferation of all these tools. Having Revit is not great, but it is currently still a single subscription, which may be a little bit easier to manage, even though I understand the costs are going up. And we talked extensively about this in our previous webinar. But with these tools, like how many would I need to buy? How would I be managing all the subscriptions? How many seats would I need to buy for each of them? And Alistair, you have pricing listed in your report. So just looking at some of the prices, I was kind of freaking out. Like, what are my costs going to be? So I do wonder, though. You guys can jump in, which is like, why don't we have more open source, applications in our industry? I think the software industry has benefited so much from having open source, and I understand, the open source BIM or IFC models and stuff are there, but with these generative design tools, I mean, maybe it's just too early currently to jump into those, but I don't know. What do you guys think for having more open source tools for democratizing the architectural design?
I couldn't agree more. I think there's been a huge amount of work done on IFC, and I suppose the thing I thought about was probably broader than file types as a whole. It was more around the idea of standardization. We talk about standardization a lot, be it ISO 19650 or BS 8541. But when you look at some of these tools from a functionality perspective, there is some standardization missing. Why is pan and orbit in one tool different to pan and orbit in a different tool? And to your point, Arvinder, if you're looking at lots of different tools, if I put my previous hat on, sort of looking after digital design, how many different softwares have I got to train people in, and how different are they? Some of the current, larger tools require, a significant amount of upskilling, and I suppose that was always a really difficult thing to explain to business leaders as a whole. Is you've bought this really expensive piece of software, it's getting increasingly more expensive. We're having to put a lot of customization into it, which is adding expense from a operational perspective. We're having to put in more training than we've ever put in before, and it's and that's happening in a challenging market. So I think where some of the new tools stand a really great shot at scoring really well in this is how intuitive are they to learn, therefore sort of reducing the barriers to entry for people to learn it and to get fluent with it. But also, you're quite right, how does licensing look? How flexible can that be for different size scales of businesses? You know, I was always trying to invite as many people to use the tool as possible, and to use a variety of different tools, because I sort of, you know, my school of thought, coming from you know, very good design practices, was don't let software dictate the design problem that you're trying to solve. Essentially, find the right tool for the right problem. And with certain license model and certainly certain cost models, the option of giving lots of tools to lots of people just wasn't becoming sustainable anymore. And that's a really hard thing to have to play back to the business, where you're then in the position where you're trying to develop personas around different people and essentially pigeonhole certain people. And designers, me included, don't like being pigeonholed. You know, I like to find the solution that solves my problem the best. I'm not wedded to something. I'm not trying to do it through vanity. You know, designers are typically trying to look after the built environment to the best of their ability. And yeah, I think a more open approach, you're quite right, Arvinder, could only sort of culturally support that from a designer's perspective.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think
Thank you.
I think just to tie it back to the report as well, is just on that point, is I think, Alistair, you mentioned in there, it was an RIBA report on AI. And I think that specifically discusses that point, right? The steep learning curve within software generally, and that's kind of one of the barriers against kind of these adoption pieces. Not that that's a shock. I think we all kind of know that as being the thing, but it's just interesting that it keeps coming up as a point. And to James's point and Darvinder's obviously is, how could we solve that? And I'm not sure. I don't know if we've all got an answer for this. I mean, look, I'll throw this into the hat for sure, and maybe that it sparks something. Maybe you think I'm a madman. I don't know. But think back to the sort of the olden UI of AutoCAD, for example, where it was a bit more customizable, right? People could have buttons, they could have menus, they could have a mixture of various things to kind of suit how they wanted to work. Love it or hate it, it kind of worked in the sense that it allowed people to do how they wanted to do it and set their system up the way it made sense to them, right? So in a lot of ways, I'm kind of like, do we hark back to that? I mean, to be honest, as a manager of that, it was a nightmare because, yeah, you're having to migrate, you know, custom profiles all the time and that kind of stuff, which is a pain. But yeah, that to one side, you know, maybe that's just something that we should be going back to, right? Just giving people that flexibility. So I don't know.
I think you guys have pretty nailed this, like in what I've been thinking in terms of the future of architecture with these current software. Like our tools become, you know, limitations in the flexibility of our designs. And a funny narrative is, you know, back in architecture school, we used to go around the city and kind of point at buildings that are clearly done on Revit. Like you can see that there's certain components that are just like, oh yeah, that's a Revit building, you know, like the limitations that software that tool provides you shows up in the designs and the outcomes. So that is especially true with some of these generative design tools here, because they are, you know, currently limited. I mean, in terms of what they can do and what kind of geometry, what kind of optimizations they can provide. And I wonder, you know, what that balance is between free hand drawing versus, you know, algorithm-based optimizations for coming up with certain, you know, geometries or aesthetics.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments here which I thought I would share actually. Just what I remember. So they'll show up and they'll disappear. So is it being recorded? Yes. It is recorded. It will be on YouTube directly after this. You'll be able to rewatch it if you want to, or share with your friends. So yeah, we'll stay relevant for everyone. Ignatius is eager to read the report. That's great. That's really helpful. And I didn't say at the beginning, but I've got a discount code for those who do want to purchase the report, then that will be available. I'll put that up at the end. Taylor has also said, well said, James. Lots of support there, which is really good. Which I think that would round your point about guiding software companies with a more kind of relationship between the two, where you can help them with their development with some decent feedback. So that's what that was about. Apologies, I've done this a bit late. This is quite interesting because so Ahmed said about generative design, it's quite company specific, and Oliver Green has created a good paper on this, and you're absolutely right. And John and I both used to work with Ollie, and he gave us a talk about the what he developed, which was unbelievable. Like the depth he went into on that is super impressive. So if you want to kind of create this yourself, he's actually got a kind of a really good piece of work there that will allow you to build that yourself. But mathematically and programmatically, it's incredibly high level, I would say, definitely for me. So what these generative design tools are offering is an easier way into using something, and the cost of those ranges from, some are free, like Wallace I is a free piece of generative design software if you use Grasshopper, all the way up to quite expensive software like TestFit for some of their options that are quite expensive. So you've got a good range of accessibility there. So
I suppose just on that, Alistair,
sure.
I'm quite keen to explore that. Obviously, the report does a really good job of explaining some of the sort of generative design terminology, but the generative AI differences, this sort of qualitative versus quantitative. And I suppose the question then sort of goes back to the designers, or perhaps the design leads in some of these businesses. How much of your brief is driven qualitatively versus quantitatively? And what weightings are you prepared to put on those to either win work or push the boundaries of the designs that you're coming up with? Because that might lean you inadvertently towards certain tools. There's nothing to say that either one is right or wrong. Being quite philosophical about it, you get the question like, where does creativity happen? And you can't force people to sit down in front of computers and be creative. Sometimes creativity happens in some of the gaps. When you go for a walk or brush your teeth and do things that allow part of your mind to be free.
Yeah.
And these softwares do a great job of iterating on options or expediting part of a process or a process, but they're not a replacement for the people element of deep thinking. And again, the report does a great job of sort of explaining for anyone who's interested in some of the nuances between AI powered and genuinely AI. And again, the open specification, or the future AEC specification, did a whole section on trying to sort of lean on genuine intelligence as opposed to AI branding. I'd be keen to see what the others thought about some of that. Like I said, 15 years ago, BIM was bashed around the internet heavily, and I dare say we're in a world where AI is bashed around the internet heavily, and it's doing a disservice to those who are doing a great job of it, and vice versa.
Go for it, John.
I was going to say I agree. I think with what you're saying there around. Obviously AI is everywhere at the moment, right? There's not a conversation I've been in months, years probably, that isn't about AI in some way. I mean, to be fair, to put that in the context, I was having a conversation with somebody last week, and they were talking about wellness, like mental health, well-being, and AI. So it literally is everywhere, which is fine. That's not, I don't think that's a problem. But I think you hit on a good point there, which is to do with where it's going well and it's been used appropriately, and it's doing a good job essentially, right? There's a proper use case behind it. I think that's one thing, but I think there's a lot of people out there maybe just kind of I don't know if I would call it misinformation, but yeah, it's just not been explained the way it should be, or indeed it's not been used the way it should be, right? And some of that's because we're figuring it out, which I totally accept. But I think also some of that is down to, I think it comes back to something I was thinking about. And again, this was a note I wrote to myself reading through the report, Alistair, which was that this idea of if we don't understand our processes and what we're trying to achieve fundamentally, then throwing tech at it doesn't solve that problem. And it doesn't matter what that tech is. It doesn't matter whether it's something basic or something super complex, right? If you don't know what your problems are and your processes are, then the software is not necessarily going to solve that problem. So I think it ties back to what we were saying right earlier on, right? You've got these 30 plus potential solutions that you've got in your report. I think they all have a reason to exist. They all have solutions and use cases and things. But again, you've got to go back to that basics of understanding what you're trying to solve in the first place, and then start applying the technology on top of that, because otherwise you're going nowhere fast, in my view.
Yeah, and how many companies would be prepared to rewrite their processes around tools? Like if it solved
Exactly.
a key part of one problem, would they massage the process elsewhere to either highlight another problem or give themselves another challenge to go after? Are we as designers potentially too precious about the processes that we follow, or are we all open to, as you say, working with technology and software vendors to improve the way we do things? I think that's always a really hard thing to juggle. I've worked with some amazingly talented people, and ironically, some of the most creative people I've worked with probably have the least software skills, or they fall into the sort of creative romantic thinker that perhaps struggles with more of the classical ordered thinking required for certain softwares. But they understand design and the forms, the spaces, and the places that they're trying to create. So yeah, I think any way software can find ways to work with those people better, you are in some ways democratizing the market by saying it doesn't need potentially as highly a skilled professional to operate. You can empower some of the greatest designers instead.
I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, how many times have you seen it in recent months, years even? You get this, like Dynamo's a good example, right? Or Rhino even. You can get super complex stuff done in that, which is, again, fantastic, but it becomes an art form in some ways, right? In the sense that if you're that way minded, it makes sense to you. Like, I'll give you this example, right? Like, I looked at that technology. People tell me how amazing it was, and I looked at that technology and I just went, nope, don't know where to start with that. And it wasn't that I couldn't learn it. It just, for whatever reason, I could not get to grips with how that thing worked.
Yeah.
So I kind of changed my mindset, which was let's understand its capabilities and then work with someone else that does know how to use that. But the fundamental problem with that is, and I think this is the thing that I always come back to, is that's fine when you've got something that's super niche and super specific, but that's not really how we want to scale out this thing across a business, right? You want to be able to, like you said, democratize that and let pretty much anyone use that. So yeah, absolutely, the challenges we've got to overcome, and I'm hopeful that some of these newer tools, especially because they're a bit more web-based, maybe not, and even if they're not, like you said, it was your point earlier about UI and UX, if we can get them to be a bit simpler and easier to use, and I think, yeah, all the better, to be fair.
Yeah, and that obviously does a huge, puts forward a huge change for IT departments as well when you start to move to SaaS-based solutions. We've probably got a huge amount of companies that have invested very heavily in hardware, be that end user computing or cloud-based computing, to deal with some of the scale and complexity of projects they're on, but also the way some of those softwares were written, which is now going to change. So for them, plotting a course to that is probably quite important, particularly if larger businesses are looking at IT strategies over the next 3 to 5 years to know what they might need to spend where and what their business operational model looks like. Because I dare say they're spending a lot more in that world now than they ever were 10, certainly 20 years ago.
Yeah, and just on that, I did meet with an architect recently, and they were saying that their spend on software. I think it included hardware and software, but it got up to about 10% of their revenue. And years ago, the ROBA was like, you need to be spending about 2.5% on technology. And when I was a head of technology, we couldn't get it below 6%. And for it to be moving up towards 10, it's like, wow, that's a real constraint for practices. And part of the report, as you can see here, is looking at those workflow costs, and like, if you stick them all together, what does it look like if it's Rhino and Revit and something else? You've got a number of costs there on a per user per year basis, more likely because of Revit is on a per year basis, and we know that's going to go up in price. And yeah, that's quite a pressure on practices.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose back to the earlier part, Alistair, on that, particularly when the AEC industry is a very complex set of stakeholders, from developers, funds, landowners, designers, contractors, everything in between. Particularly when you go down the subcontractor supply chain, it doesn't make a lot of sense for every entity in that chain to have access to all of those products.
Yeah.
So are we sort of leaning towards a world where the designers become, sort of, for want of a better phrase, technology gatekeepers, or those best placed to give advice on technology to the rest of the supply chain? And I suppose when technology costs are going up, that's a challenge if your scope and ability or your service lines are still limited to what they were before. I suppose if your tech stack increases and gets more complicated, is there the opportunity to expand your service lines or to add greater value to your clients? I suppose, would an architect be prepared to take on a tool like TestFit so that it could run certain feasibility studies for developers, saving them the need to do it and sort of get in earlier on work or maintain engagement or work in a relationship? Perhaps there are other factors to consider than just stripping everything back to the bare essentials.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. That whole concept of what do we do as architects? What does that look like? And where do we want to offer services? Where do we want to expand into? Do we want to specialize? And some of these tools could provide the opportunity for that. There are challenges with it as well. As, for example, if you don't use these tools, will another architect use it, or will your developer client use it? And
cut you all out.
Unfortunately, it's possible, isn't it? It's possible that they because the tools aren't actually, from my use, that they're not that complicated to use. So I think that for someone to use in a very basic massing way, they could quite quickly go, okay, it's 10 stories high, it's got this unit mix, I can take that to a planner, it gives me enough in terms of high level to get information back from them to see if it's viable. Yeah,
especially if these tools can start to build in constraints like some of the local planning regulations and things like that. You're sort of absorbing what is currently in the expertise of designers, gets transitioned into the software. There's probably a risk question and sort of who owns the risk of some of that later down the line. But like you say, from a startup for 10, how fast can we decide on some viability? Yeah, it certainly changes the mix.
And just on that, one of the software is Arc Design. Their software is specifically for New York. So if you're doing developments in New York, it will deal with all of the setbacks and all of the zoning criteria and all the constraints that are there for the city of New York, which really surprised me when I found that out. But obviously New York is so development heavy in terms of high value buildings because they're vertical. Then a tool like that makes sense, doesn't it? But for most tools, they're not going to design it around a city, but it's just so happens that New York's got a special set of criteria that they can code into the software.
Yeah, and I think I've seen ones that do that for London too, right? There's a few options. And also, you mentioned one in your report, I think it's called Paraffin, I think, which was super, or had some niche in hotel design.
Hotels, does hotels,
So, But I guess I don't know. I'd be keen to hear what people think that are listening in as well in the comments. But I guess the danger with that stuff is that how niche do you take it, or what niches do you tackle, right? Because again, if you look at the report that you've put together, there's a lot of them that seem to tackle things like residential, right? Which kind of makes sense. Like, it's a fairly big sector. Everybody kind of gets into that. And obviously things that are a bit more niche are like healthcare and so on. But equally, does that make them too niche? I'm just throwing that as a question more than a comment, but I just wondered what people thought of that, because I think it ties back to what we were saying earlier. Sorry, James, just quickly, is we tied back to that earlier, we're talking about these personas and stuff and saying, get a tool to just do a very good job for this persona here, but I don't think that's a bad thing, but I just wonder what you thought of that.
I suppose the question there is, some sectors are more definable than others. Resi, subject to the market and the region you're in, can be defined. So in that case, the tools can build a framework for inputs, and it's then to the users to either use the right drop down for the inputs or put in the inputs that are relevant to them. I suppose when you drift into more cultural buildings and museums, that becomes a very difficult set of criteria to develop, certainly from a quantitative basis. But you're quite right. And that's, I suppose, why it's such an interesting time, because the market is trying to respond to different needs. And, there's a good section, Alistair, on sort of how these tools are growing from a funding perspective, which is really useful to see. Yeah. And I think it's good that people are aware of that, because that does dictate the growth that certain products can go on. In some ways, it's really good because it means they can put in a lot of money to invest and develop the tool. But it means they have to convert sales at some point, which can mean they come to market slightly before maturity, or be quite niche and only solve a very limited part of a process problem. But yeah, they're not all equal. Sorry, Arvind, you look like you're going to say something that I've interrupted.
Oh no, I mean, you guys are just having an amazing conversation. I wish I can just listen to this for more than the 6 minutes we have left. But I just wanted to kind of say, this reminds me of the philosophical idea of like what our tools hold, like the knowledge extraction that is inherent within the tools we use, and how many dials do we want to give the tool user to customize that specific tool for what they're doing. Like for example, in Hammer only has the handle, and it has a customizable, which side of the hammer do you want to use, while maybe a Swiss Army knife will have a lot more options. And it's the question seems like, what do we want, or is it a case by case of what a specific designer in a specific context wants from their tool, and having from a hammer to a Swiss Army knife is what we need in the industry currently.
And that comes back to the idea about Revit, doesn't it? Is Revit, what tool is Revit right now for us? And James made a great point there, where you've got Revit, but we're having to build all these other custom integrations around it to get it to perform the way we want it to perform. So it's kind of like a tool, but it's got loads of bolt-ons, because it won't print out things the way we want to, or we can't number rooms automatically, or whatever it might be. And thinking about it from that aspect, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I suppose, in some ways, this report is trying to say, look, this is where these tools are in terms of their maturity, their complexity, and the range of things that they can do or can't do. And I think I made a mention in the report about maturity. A lot of them will continue to mature and get better and better. And I need to update this report probably in 6 months, definitely in 12 months, to say, okay, this is where the industry is, so where these tools are now.
Good.
I think
good luck with that, Alistair. How many times do we have to reread 400 pages and revise it? I don't disagree. I think when the market's moving quickly, it should act as a live iterative thing because we are fortunate that the market is moving quickly on these things. Some tools may survive, some tools may not survive, but you know, if it helps serve designers, then it's got great value.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just one last thing on that. I think as well, Alistair, you've mentioned it in the report. I think it's towards the end, we've kind of scored these solutions against various criteria, and ones that were potentially market leading only 6 months ago or 12 months ago or something like that are now finding themselves mid-table or lower even. And I think that's just, I mean, that's the nature of the game, right? Like, that's how these things develop, right? One that leads suddenly is overtaken because somebody else has seen that maybe, and then they've put something in that's slightly better. But yeah, so you definitely need to be keeping on top of it. But then, again, I think that's the nature of anything. That as soon as a bit of competition is added, things become a lot more fluid quite quickly. So
yeah, and just one thing to note here is that because obviously I've scored software, and as you say, John, some are going to perform slightly better than others based on that criteria. So I'm hoping that, you know, like James said, it is an objective assessment based on a set of criteria that the industry's put together in the future AEC software specification to say this is what we're looking for. But what I have put in there in the vendor section is a link to a spreadsheet. So it's essentially a right to reply. So if I've written something, if there's something in there where they don't agree, and that's completely acceptable, then in that spreadsheet, they'll be able to say, look, on this point, it's not right, or we've updated this, or that's part of our roadmap, we're not there yet, or I'm hoping they'll say that I'm factually incorrect on it, anything. But, you know, there is going to be an opportunity for that right to reply, and then that could be brought back into the report in future iterations to say, okay, we've got feedback, this is what we've added in there, and we can monitor and track that over time.
yeah,
100%,
absolutely.
100%. And the software specification was written with that in mind. You know, there's a point in it about industry and vendor sort of collaboration, exactly. And you know, I think to invite the conversation is always really good because you know, how many people that wrote software could envisage it being used the way certain people now use it? You know, sometimes your users are the best method for you to better understand what it's capable of doing. And yeah, building community around this, I think, is probably one of the most important things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We've done a good hour on this.
I was just going to, just quickly, I was just going to add in, I think you asked the question, right, it was actually before we joined the live, but just about kind of the future generative design and AI generally. Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting stat. I'd done a bit of research, obviously, before this session, just to kind of find out some information. And there's obviously a couple of different things, different reports kind of report different things, but I just thought it was interesting that currently, it's a report by the RIBA, by the way, but currently 41% of the UK architects are using AI according to that report, and it stated that 54% were expecting to adopt AI in some way, shape or form within the next 2 years. So, you know, it's not going anywhere. I think the reason why I want to mention this is a bit like BIM. We thought it was going to be a flash in the pan, it's another kind of fad, and look where we are now. It's not going anywhere, and in fact, if anything, technology has just got even more kind of, you know, we're further on than where we were then. So I think that was just really the thing I wanted to mention, was that I don't think we should bury our head in the sands with this stuff either. We really need to take it seriously and find ways to use this as best we can. And I think ultimately that's what the report that you've put together, Alistair, really helps with, is how can we take this stuff from where we are today into the future.
Okay. Right, I just wanted to say very quickly that there is a discount code for the report because it's on my marketplace and it is for sale. There's a few different options that you can purchase it. So there is like what I've called a taster version, which is basically an introduction to all the software without the review, and you can buy just that part. Or there is the full report in itself, which you can buy, which is great. This discount code should work with all of these. But you can also buy the report with some consultancy or workshop as well. So there's some different options there. And obviously, clearly, I'm trying to monetize this a little bit and to see how it goes. But as I say, it's been 3 to 4 months worth of work. It's over 100,000 words. It's incredibly in depth. And I'd love this to be more widely read. If you are a university or a student, please send me an email. I'll give you a special code for 20% off for students and for universities as well, because I'd love this to get into the hands of the next generation as much as possible. But yeah, please reach out on that. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's attended today, to John, James, and to Arvinda. It's really amazing to have you here. I really appreciate your time. I don't know, do you want to give maybe a final thought, anything that each, just to say a final word? No.
Yes, I'm happy to, but I was waiting for somebody else to talk.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, I think, just what I was saying there, like, honestly, I think this report's honestly, like, I knew it would be great, obviously, because obviously we've worked together in the past, and I know kind of the level and the detail and stuff that you go into. But it certainly opened my eyes to kind of what's out there at the moment, and it's what I said just 2 minutes ago, that if nothing else, let's kind of try and get our heads around it using reports like this to understand kind of how we can use that technology to move ourselves forward as businesses as much as it is an industry thing. I can't see this going anywhere else. So, Alistair, thanks for putting it together.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, final word would be our profession, in one way or another, is digital, whether we love it or not. But I think it's important that designers establish a good relationship with technology, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be digitally extreme. It just means you have to understand the relationship that you want with technology, and how it best serves your USP as a business and the needs you have as a designer. And yeah, I think I implore people to do that wherever possible. But yeah, the report is a great read, so please go and get it.
Thank you. Great. Arvinda.
Buy the report. Yeah.
Oh, God.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of time any firm, any individual can save. Instead of doing their own research, they should just hop on, stand on the giants, shoulders of the giants before, and who've done the work. So Alistair has done that, and I think this is invaluable to any firm.
That's really interesting, because I was thinking I was standing on the shoulders of other giants with the future AEC software specification. So
yeah, it's built on.
Really.
And we're all standing on the shoulders of the software developers that decided to do it in the first place. So maybe they're the ultimate giants. Yeah,
well, they're taking a chance, aren't they? Build a piece of software. Is it going to be adopted? And it's startup life is exciting, but it's quite risky, and yeah, absolutely.
It's also probably quite a brutal business. So regardless of what you take from the report, be kind to some of the software companies that are in that, because no matter how they've come to market, it's been hard work on their side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, excellent point. Okay, I'm going to finish this off. Thank you. I really appreciate all of your time. That's been really excellent. I've enjoyed that a lot, and I appreciate you having looked through the report and sharing your thoughts. In terms of reaching out to you all, if people want to find you, this is on LinkedIn, so people will be able to search by your name and find you. I think that way. Is that best?
Yeah.
And obviously, if you want to contact me, I've put my email on the screen as well. So please get in touch. Let me know any questions or thoughts you might have. And what we'll be doing for the next sessions is looking at maybe some of these generative design tools in a bit more depth, and maybe try and invite some of them on board to kind of talk to you about what they look like, how they've developed them, and explore that in a bit more detail. So watch your space, but yeah, in 2 weeks' time, I think. But yes, thank you very much, everyone, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.